Welcome. This is a series to help you become confident and impactful while speaking by understanding the power of intentional communication. Similar to the work that I do with my clients, this series is going to help you go through a 3-part transformation, working on your inner, your outer, and your influence. And that's by working on your mindset, how you think about communication as well, which will then set you up for the outer expression, how you actually sound when you speak. And then this will take you to the 3rd part, the influence, the actual impact that you're having through the way that you're communicating with others. Hi, I'm Dr. Christina Ady. I am a social psychologist, and I work with leaders, founders, and coaches to help them develop the kind of presence that makes a difference and the type of communication that comes across as confident, that feels natural, and that is impactful in the best of ways. So, in this first episode, we are going to be covering the 3 mindset shifts that you need to make to even understand the power of intentional communication so that you are laying the foundation and the groundwork, if you will, for the practice and the skills and the communication strategies that will come down the line in the series. If you watch the entire thing, the goal is to help you become confident, effective, and impactful when you speak with others, whether that is at work or in your business or just in your everyday life. Let's get into it. Starting with your inner world. You see, your psychology is so incredibly important because your psychology is the foundation of everything else about you, about how you think, how you act, and what you do. So when it comes to communication, there are a few mindset shifts that we need to make when it comes to your inner narrative around what good communication means and what being a good communicator actually looks like. By making these 3 shifts that we're going to talk about in this first episode, you are going to be so much more attuned to the dynamics of a conversation while it's happening and way more prepared to implement the strategies that we'll talk about later. So, let's start laying the foundation for confident communication using psychology. There are 3 specific things that I'd like you to consider, and that is going to be understanding that everyone has a different point of view, the importance of staying neutral, the impact that your emotional regulation has on conversations. Now, before you go ahead and say, I've heard this before, or I already know this, or that sounds overly simplistic, Christina, hang in there for a second. Because just because you know something doesn't mean you're doing it. And more importantly, just because you've heard something before doesn't mean I'm going to say it in the exact same way. So stick around and let's start unpacking this. Now, the first is understanding that everyone has a different point of view. And this is foundational for great communication. I cannot overestimate the importance that this has. Now, if we are to back up for a moment, what is your point of view? What is your perspective? And where does it even come from? When we think about this from a psychological perspective, who you are, how you see the world, and how you think begins to be deeply ingrained in you from birth, from an extremely young age, based on the circumstances in which you grew up, the types of parents, of friends, influence you had in your life, as well as the actual experiences that you have had. So when you take the sum of all of this together, who you are, what you were taught, what you were told is valuable and isn't, what you were taught is your morals versus things that maybe your family, your friends didn't quite care about. When you consider the impact that your experiences have had on you, what you were praised for, what you were scolded for, summing all of this up creates your perspective. And this is where it's important to consider that the life experiences that you have had, the things that you have seen, the things that you have done will differ from someone else. Even if that someone else seems to be extremely similar to you, or on the surface seems to have gone through similar life experiences. For example, I consider myself to be an athlete. Since early childhood, I have been very athletic, participating in solo sports, participating in team sports, going through various competitions. But even if you consider yourself to be an athlete, that does not mean that the types of competitions we've been in, the types of competitiveness that we have seen, the types of experiences that we have had will be the same. Let me give you an example. I used to do cross-country running. And if you've done cross-country running, maybe you've had this experience as well. But it was not uncommon for people to get a little elbowy while running and push people out the way and try and maneuver to get a better position. Now, clearly then, there's two types of people that were in these races. The people who ran and tried to win fair and square, and the people that would elbow others out the way or even cut corners sometimes to try and shorten the distance that they were running. Same race, same competition, different experiences. You may have been in a different race with completely different rules and regulations and experiences as well. And just because they're different doesn't mean that they're wrong. And so when I talk about things like team sports, when I talk about competitiveness, I come from an extremely different perspective than you do, most likely. But again, neither one is wrong. Both are equally valid because they are rooted in the experiences that you have had and that the other individual has had. So just because someone says something, or just because someone reacts in a way that you personally never would, that does not mean it gives you the right to discount their experience, to say things like, oh, I would never, you're so crazy, what are you talking about? These common phrases that people have as a reaction to things. And instead, you have to understand that their perspective is different, their experience is different. And so what they say and how they react is different. All right? Making sense here? So that's the first thing. Knowing when you go into every single conversation and interaction that there will be differences in opinion. There will be differences in perspective. There will be different points of view. And that is expected. That is not wrong. That is not something you need to argue over. That is something that you need to anticipate. Okay? Awesome. Which brings us to point number 2, the importance of being neutral. Now that you understand that people have a whole host of different life experiences, and they will have things that they say that you might never be able to relate to, it's important to know how to remain neutral in those situations. Because if you are reacting, you are going to most likely come across as being judgmental. And think about yourself. If anyone seems like they're being judgmental to you, you immediately shut down in the conversation. You don't want to tell them anymore. You don't want to be there. You don't even want to talk to them again, most likely. And so you don't want to be the one that's doing that to others. Because sometimes it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what your reaction is. It matters how you come across in the conversation, and it matters how you make the other person feel. So if you want to be an effective and an impactful communicator, it can't be all about you. It can't be all about your own perspective and your own experience in a conversation. After all, you're not living a monologue. You're in a dialogue. And that means accounting for the other person's experience in the conversation with you. And that means learning to remain neutral while speaking to them and not having your emotional reactions, your judgments, your thoughts come through in a way that is negative, in a way that is judgmental, in a way that could just be misinterpreted as you being a jerk. Which brings us to our third mindset shift, and that is the importance and the power of emotional regulation. Now, by emotional regulation, I am referring to your ability to control how you feel in the moment. Now, here's the thing. This is very, very akin to emotional intelligence, but it's a little bit more inward facing. Your emotional regulation is your ability to, number one, notice how you actually feel, notice when there's a change in your emotional state, and number two, deal with it in the moment. Now, what ends up happening to most people is they're never actually taught emotional regulation techniques. How you react and what you're taught about emotions typically is indirect and comes through how your family tends to deal with things. If your family tends to sweep everything under the rug and never talk about it, you likely do the same thing. If your family tends to blow up and yell and just like the equivalent of steam coming out their ears because they're so infuriated and they're going to show it to you, you likely do the same thing. And so it's important to consider that how you react will always influence the direction that the conversation is going in. Let me give you an example. Let's say someone says something that is baffling to you and you respond with like, I would never do that. And you come across very judgmental. Automatically, that changes the direction of the conversation. Maybe the other person says something like, you lack empathy. And now you get mad. And you don't even notice that you get mad. You just react automatically, and you start arguing with them, and you're the most empathetic person they know. You're way more empathetic than them, of course. And can you see how the conversation starts to spiral? Because it's automatic moments, automatic reactions that completely change the nature of how you speak, how you show up, and how you interact with the other person. That changes how you are perceived as a communicator. After all, you will not be defined as a good communicator if you tend to blow up every time you get upset. And so when it comes to your emotional regulation, there's two things you need to understand. One, how you are feeling in the moment. And two, when that changes, how to get back to a place of being a little bit more calm or a little bit more in control. Now this, I'll be fully transparent with you, is not anything that will change overnight, especially depending on where you're starting from if you tend to have less emotional regulation to begin with. But it is extremely important to continue to work on this skill, because if you put in the reps and the practice and actually work on changing this, a year from now, 2 years from now, you'll be a completely different communicator. You'll be a completely different person because your mindset, your underlying psychological state will be completely different. But if you don't, and you say, this is hard, this is silly, this is not worth my time, you're going to be in the same exact spot a year from now, or maybe even worse. So here's what I want you to do to sort of start working on your emotional regulation. Start noticing how you feel in the middle of a conversation. And there will likely be differences in how you feel. For example, most people, when they start to feel a little bit bored or disinterested, they either shut down, pull out their phone and look away, or they interrupt the other person and just start talking about what they wanted to talk about. Start to notice if that's happening to you. And then also notice how often you tend to get aggravated, agitated, to blow up, and to just be more in a negative state in an interaction. If you're someone who tends to yell, if you're someone who tends to be angry and aggressive, or if you're someone who tends to shut down and be upset and quiet, these are things that you need to notice because they're happening and they need to change. Now, if this is hard to do on your own, that's okay. Hang in there, keep trying. Honestly, the repetitions will make a major difference, and we can go into this and the why and the logistics behind it in another episode. But essentially, when you are rewiring the way that you think, it's not an overnight process. Your thoughts have been playing on a loop and have been quite literally wired in the connections in your brain for quite some time. For some people, for decades, if we're being honest. And so untangling those connections and rewiring them into new ones takes a little bit of time. And understanding that it's just part of the process is a good thing, because it helps you know you're not doing it wrong and you're not failing. You're just still in the process of change. And so if you want to try a different exercise, ask your family and friends to give their perspective on how you communicate. Ask them to describe you in a few different words, or ask them to tell you how often you tend to have different emotional reactions. Are you someone who tends to be easily triggered? Are you someone who gets mad quickly? Are you a hothead, right? Sometimes getting other people to describe us helps us see things from a new perspective, because there's always a disconnect between how you see yourself and how others actually view you. So I hope you found this video helpful. This is laying the foundation for your mindset and your psychological understanding of what needs to be in place with your thinking before you're able to articulate yourself clearly and confidently. So stay tuned for the next video, where I will dive deeper into the psychology of intentional communication and what you need to know about yourself and your mindset to even start to become someone who's confident while speaking. This work is what will set you up for success, to be impactful and to be an effective communicator with others. See you in the next one.